Hello, Frizzle fanatics! So I first read The Raven Cycle like a decade ago, and I have just been chasing that high ever since. I have been reading urban fantasy books left and right, searching for anything that makes me feel like the Raven Cycle books made me feel. So this is a video for the people that are looking for books similar to the Raven Boys, where I'm going to give you all the ones that I've found. But this is also a video for people who have never read the Raven Boys, because one, you totally should if we have similar taste at all, and two, these are all just books that I generally recommend, and all books that I love, so they're recommendations for everyone. When I was compiling this list, I had like a lot of trouble because I was thinking like every single time I had a recommendation, I had to look at it and be like, but that's not quite Raven Boys enough. Like every single book on this list, I feel like, but that's not quite Raven Boys enough. And I've just never read a book that was quite Raven Boys enough for me. But these are all books that do have part of that Raven Boysy energy, and I can at least guarantee that a lover of the Raven Boys, such as myself, has the capacity to love all of these books, because I do. So maybe that also applies to you. So a quick overview of what the Raven Boys is about and why it's so special, and then I'll get into all the recommendations. The Raven Boys is a YA quartet that is following a group of teens. They are on a quest to find this long-dead Welsh king. It takes place in modern-day Virginia, Appalachian area. It's got this interesting mix of both like small-town vibes and snooty private school vibes, because you have characters coming from both of the backgrounds. But a lot of the atmosphere of this book is intensely witchy, where you've got characters that are psychics and characters that are magicians and characters that have magic powers that I can't even tell you because it'd be a spoiler, but are so cool. And just the atmosphere and the vibes that this book invokes is so fun, and I love it. One of the other things that this book really excels at is the cozy found family aspect, where these books really take time to form relationships between all of our characters and just have those cozy little moments inside the group. They're like beautifully slow paced in that way, where we can take breaks from the intense adventure of all of the magic and the quest and just have times when the friends are going out to pizza together. So you slap all that together into one book series and it's brilliant. So well written. All the characters are amazing. I love it. It's my obsession, and I just reread this series and I loved it so much. So now let's get into the recommendations of books similar to the Raven Boys. I've split these recommendations into three main categories. Books whose main vibe is cozy, books whose main vibe is intense, and books whose main vibe is adventurous. Because the Raven Boys mixes all of these vibes together, and a lot of the recommendations do too, but a lot of the recommendations are also missing part of those aspects, so I've tried to sort them so you know what you're getting yourself into. So first up, let's talk about 5 cozy-ish books. I'm going to start with the most cozy leading to the least cozy. So first up, let's do my most purely cozy recommendation, which is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. This is following a woman who is a witch, and she's so lonely because there's a rule that witches have to be very secretive so that there's no witch hunts after them. But then she gets recruited to become the magic tutor to 3 young witch children that are being taken care of by this foster family, but no one in that foster family knows how to do magic, so they need to bring in a witch to teach these little girls magic. So she goes to the mansion, she gets to know the girls, she gets to know the adults that are taking care of the girls, and gets to befriend all of them. It's a very heartwarming book, definitely the most pure cozy of these recommendations, but does have the fun witchy magic that you also get in the Raven Boys. Next up, a book that's part cozy and part adventurous, we have 𝐂𝐸𝐿𝐴. This is a middle grade urban fantasy following a teenage girl who has the power to raise the ghosts of the dead. Mostly this comes into play as her animal sidekick is the ghost of her old dog. Very fun. At the beginning of the book, her cousin is murdered, and she takes it upon herself to go solve his murder. It's kind of got like Scooby and the Gang vibes, and I think a lot of the coziness of the story comes in with her great relationship with her friends and family. This is a very low drama, high good support network kind of book in that way, and it's very fun. And it reminds me of the good familial support networks that you see in the Raven Boys. Also, the ghostly magic. It's a teensy bit creepy, so it also fits. Next up, a middle grade book that is cozy and adventurous, we have 𝐷𝐿. This story follows a family where when you turn 13 years old, you get a little superpower. And our protagonist, right on the eve of her 13th birthday, there is a family tragedy and disaster. The family's mom and dad are out of town dealing with this disaster, and the kids are left under some dubious supervision of a grandpa that sleeps a lot and some not so friendly sometimes neighbors. And then the kids left at home find themselves going on a little quest and adventure as our protagonist is also trying to adjust to her new superpower life and other coming of age elements. So though this book is lacking the creepy intensity that's also part of the Raven Boys, I feel like it is really on par with the fun friend group adventure with a little bit of magic thrown in there. Next up, a book that feels maybe half cozy and half intense adventure is War for the Oaks. This is an adult urban fantasy following a woman who is chosen by the Fae to participate in their new war. She doesn't really want to do this, but she's roped into it, and along the way she gets to get to know lots of Fae, both the tricksy evil kind and some kind that becomes her new friends. Over the course of this book, she's also dealing with a breakup and dealing with trying to form a new band because she's a musician. And I feel like this book is just so good at balancing that act of the very fun, sometimes really creepy magic and modern day, let's form a rock and roll band and make new friends vibes, which is similar to the balance that you see in the Raven Boys series. Next up, The Witch Would Not, which again balances cozy and intense. This is a Victorian fairy tale, so it's like taking place in the Victorian era, but there's also ghosts and curses and fae involved. We are following a woman named Winnie who's been summoned to this haunted mansion to try to make it maybe a little bit less haunted and also become the governess for this boy. And as things unfold, she realizes that maybe this haunted, cursed mansion is a lot more than she can actually handle, and has to make some unlikely allies in order to cope with that. So those are all of my mainly cozy recommendations. And yes, I do love all of those books, and all of them remind me of the Raven Boys in various ways that I wish I could rant to you about for hours, but we don't really have the time in this video. So you'll just have to take my word for that and all of the rest of the recommendations I'm about to get you. Let's get into 5 intense recommendations. So again, let's go from most intense to least intense, starting with the Dreamer trilogy, the first of which is Call Down the Hawk. So I know this is pretty basic because this trilogy is a sequel series to the Raven Boys quartet. But I've also seen a lot of hate online from the Raven Boys fans about the Dreamer trilogy, and I don't think it's very deserved. I think you just have to know going in what you're getting. Because if you're expecting Raven Cycle Part 2, you're not going to get it in the Dreamer trilogy. I know! It's so sad. I think one of the main differences here is the Dreamer trilogy feels a lot more intense, less cozy than the Raven Boys series did. Another main difference is pretty much the only character from the original series that you're following closely is Ronan and his brothers. If you're here for the other characters' content, I'm sorry, you're not really gonna get it that much, and it's disappointing, but they're still really good books. And once you accept that you're not really gonna get much Blue or Gansey or Adam or any of those characters' content in the Dreamer trilogy, I think you might actually really love them because they're so well done. And no, I can't tell you what they're about because it would totally spoil the Raven Cycle. Definitely, you have to read the Raven Boys books first. My next recommendation in the intense category is Bone Dance. If you're looking for the vibes you got in the Raven Cycle where there was like the mysterious tarot card readings, here is where I would point you. Bone Dance is part made up of supernatural magic and part made up of futuristic post-apocalyptic society. We are following a character whose job it is to sell black market VHS tapes until our protagonist gets wrapped up in some voodoo magic / tarot cards / conspiracy to bring around another apocalypse adventure. I love this book and do recommend it, but I will give the caveat that it is intense and does get especially intense in the themes of bodily autonomy. Next recommendation is Even Though I Knew the End. This is an urban fantasy, detective noir, mystery novella. And if one of the things that you love about the Raven Boys is the complicated queer relationships, here's one of the ones I would point you to for that. Because we are following a female detective who has some mysterious, maybe poor decisions in her past that are now starting to catch up with her. And this causes a lot of stress because she just wants to settle down with her nice girlfriend and put everything behind her, but it doesn't become an option. Then throughout this book, she's pushed into investigating a mysterious magical serial killer and getting tangled up in all of that. Then I think you should read Vampires of El Norte, which is intense and adventurous. This takes place in 1840s Mexico with vampires. You have both the supernatural beast of Mexican folklore style vampires and the metaphorical vampires of the Americans invading Mexico. At the center of this novel is a somewhat doomed love story about a rich heiress and a humble rancher who was working for her family, how they had a love story as they were teens, how they were ripped apart, and now they're coming back together in this time of vampires. The vibes of this story is perfectly like intense, spooky, adventurous, but mixed in with like this beautiful romance along the way, and I think especially if you are drawn to the tangled drama around Blue's love life in the Raven Boys, this one would probably also appeal to you. Next up is All the Crooked Saints, another book by Maggie Stiefvater. I debated for a while whether or not I should include books by the same author as the Raven Cycle on this recommendations list, but I ended up deciding to include them because I would not recommend all of the books by Maggie Stiefvater to fans of the Raven Cycle. I think her work has enough tonal and quality diversity in it that just because you liked one of her books doesn't mean you're going to like all of them, but the ones I think you will like are here on this list. So All the Crooked Saints is a pretty good mix of intense, adventurous, and cozy, but I've decided to put it here in intense because that's what stuck with me the most. We are following 3 teenagers of a family that has the power to grant miracles, but they always come at a cost. So then the teens are wrestling both with that and with normal coming-of-age tales. This one's a standalone, and I think it needs more eyes on it, and I honestly need to reread it. Next up, let's give you 5 adventurous recommendations, starting with the most adventurous and working our way down to the more mixes. Starting off with The Scorpio Races, again by Maggie Stiefvater, the same author as The Raven Cycle. This book takes place on a little turn-of-the-century island where there are magic, deadly horses. And people being people, of course, they use these horses in a somewhat deadly race that is a big thing on this island every year. So we're following both a guy who has been an awesome racer for years, loves these dangerous horses, and is super passionate about all of it, and a girl who is somewhat reluctantly starting to get involved in the races out of desperation and how they collide. Next up on the adventurous recommendations, I would say, is Vespertine. Vespertine is like, what if you took the story of Joan of Arc and also the story of like Marvel's Venom and smashed them together and had the most beautiful young adult adventure tale as a result. So we're following a teenage girl and she is a nun. She takes care of corpses and that's the way she likes it because she doesn't really like people that much. And then one day she accidentally gets like this demon in her head which grants her superpowers, and then she has to go like on this pilgrimage quest to try to get rid of the demon and or maybe help her country. It's a very fun book with a little bit of intensity and coziness, but mostly adventure feeling. Then I would recommend to you When Among Crows, an urban fantasy novella which I love, and I think of all of the recommendations on this list has the most similar vibes to the Raven Cycle. This book takes place in modern day Chicago, but it has magical creatures inspired by Polish folklore. We're following on a man on a desperate quest to find Baba Yaga and all of the various magical vampires and creatures he ropes in on the quest along the way, how they bond, how they betray each other, how they forgive each other, and all of that. I highly recommend this one. I loved it, and I would say don't read the blurb. It spoils the book. I mean, honestly, I'd recommend to just like never read book blurbs ever, because like I feel like they often spoil the book, but this one especially, okay? Because something that When Among Crows does so well is the delicate balance of exposition, and like the blurb throws off that balance terribly. The next recommendation is Finder, which is pretty adventurous with shades of intensity and coziness. We're following a man who lives in a city that's half motorcycle gangs and half people with fun magical abilities. It's the human worlds and the fae worlds smashed together. He has the magic ability to find lost objects, and this attracts the attention of the police when they have a case that they can't quite crack, and then recruit him to try to help. And as he starts getting involved, things start getting bigger and bigger in this adventurous novel. One of the things that this book does really well, similar to The Raven Boys, is taking time for the soft, quiet moments where characters really get to bond with each other. And then our last recommendation is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. So this book is adventurous, but I'd say it's like 40% adventurous and 60% dry Dickensian writing style. So if that's not your thing, then like that's not your thing. But if it is your thing, then the adventurous parts of this book really do remind me a lot of the adventurous parts of The Raven Boys, and I think you could really love this one. In 1806 England, there is only one person who is doing magic, and that is Mr. Norrell. He is a recluse who would much rather be be with his books than be performing his magic at parties. However, when he attracts the attention of the public, he starts getting a taste for showing off, which leads him into more and more trouble. Along the way, he also acquires the apprentice, Jonathan Strange, a young man who is just trying to be useful in life and like, hey, found out he's good at magic. And then they have such an interesting both mentorship and combative relationship where they've got a lot of different ideas of how magic should be performed and used. And they get into bigger and bigger disasters as they both keep biting off more magic than they can really handle. These are really all books that I love for similar reasons that I love the Raven Boys, and I really hope that you can pick some of them up and find some of that joy too. Thank you for watching.